Welcome to my humble abode, darlings. Come in out of the rain and get comfortable. I have a story to tell you, and I hope you enjoy. If you do, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. "20,000 Leagues Under the Sea", Chapter 21, Captain Nemo's Thunderbolt. We look at the edge of the forest without rising, my hand stopping in the action of putting it to my mouth. Ned Land's completing its office. "Stones do not fall from the sky," remarked Conseil, "or they would merit the name aerolites." A second stone, carefully aimed, that made a savory pigeon's leg fall from Conseil's hand, gave still more weight to his observations. We all three arose, shouldered our guns, and were ready to reply to any attack. "Are they apes?" cried Ned Land. "Very nearly. They are savages." Oh dear. "To the boat," I said, hurrying to the sea. It was indeed necessary to beat a retreat, for about 20 natives, armed with bows and slings, appeared on the skirts of the copse that masked the horizon to the right, hardly 100 steps from us. Our boat was moored about 60 feet from us. The savages approached us, not running, but making hostile demonstrations. Stones and arrows fell thickly. Ned Land had not wished to leave any provisions, and in spite of his imminent danger, his pig on one side and kangaroo on the other, he went tolerably fast. In 2 minutes, we were on the shore to load the boat with the provisions and arms, to push it out to sea, and ship the oars, was the work of an instant. We had not gone 2 cable lengths when 100 savages, howling and gesticulating, entered the water up to their waists. I watched to see if their apparition would attract some men from the Nautilus onto the platform, but no. The enormous machine, lying off, was completely deserted. 20 minutes later, we were on board. The panels were open, and after making the boat fast, we entered into the interior of the Nautilus. I descended to the drawing room, from whence I heard some chords. Captain Nemo was there, bending over his organ and plunged in a musical ecstasy. "Captain," he did not hear me. "Captain," I said, touching his hand. He shuddered and, turning around, said, "Ah, it's you, Professor. Well, have you had a good hunt? Have you botanized successfully?" "Yes, Captain, but we have unfortunately brought a troop of bipeds whose vicinity troubles me." "What bipeds?" "Savages." "Savages," he echoed, ironically. "So you are astonished, Professor, at having set foot on a strange land and finding savages?" "Savages! Where are there not any? Besides, are they worse than any others, these whom you call savages?" "Good on you, Nemo." "But, Captain!" "How many have you counted?" 100 at least." "Monsieur Anorax," replied Captain Nemo, placing his fingers on the organ stops, "when all the natives of Papua are assembled on the shore, the Nautilus will have nothing to fear from their attack." The captain's fingers were then running over the keys of the instrument, and I remarked that he touched only the black keys, which gave his melodies an essentially Scotch characteristic. Soon he had forgotten my presence, and had plunged into a reverie that I did not disturb. I went up again on the platform. Night had already fallen, for in this low latitude the sun sets rapidly and without twilight. I could only see the island indistinctly, but the numerous fires, lighted on the beach, showed that the natives did not think of leaving it. I was alone for several hours, sometimes thinking of the natives, but without any dread of them, for the imperturbable confidence of the captain was catching. Sometimes forgetting them to admire the splendor of the night in the tropics. My remembrances went to France, in the train of those zodiacal stars that would shine in some hour's time. The moon shone in the midst of the constellation of the zenith. The night slipped away without any mischance. The islanders, frightened no doubt at the sight of a monster aground in the bay, the panels were open and would have offered an easy access to the interior of the Nautilus. At 6 o'clock in the morning of the 8th of January, I went up on the platform. The dawn was breaking. The island soon showed itself through the dissipating fog, first the shore, then the summits. The natives were there, more numerous than on the day before, 500 or 600 perhaps, some of them profiting by the low water, and coming onto the coral at less than 2 cable lengths from the Nautilus. I distinguished them easily. They were true Papuans, with athletic figures, men of good races, large high foreheads, large but not broad and flat, and white teeth. Their woolly hair, with a reddish tinge, showed off their black shining bodies like those of the Nubians. From the lobes of their ears, cut and distended, hung chaplets of bone. Most of these savages were naked. Amongst them I remarked some women, dressed from the hips to the knees in quite a crinoline of herbs that sustained a vegetable waistband. Some chiefs had ornamented their necks with a crescent and collar of glass beads, red and white. Nearly all were armed with bows, arrows, and shields, and carrying on their shoulders a sort of net containing these round stones which they cast from their slings with great skill. One of these chiefs, rather near to the Nautilus, examined it attentively. He was perhaps a Mado of high rank, for he was draped in a mat of banana leaves, notched around the edges, and set off with brilliant colors. I could have easily knocked down this native, who was within a short length, but I thought it was better to wait for the real, hostile demonstrations. Between the Europeans and the savages, it is proper for the Europeans to parry sharply, not to attack. During low water, the natives roamed about near the Nautilus, but were not troublesome. I heard them frequently repeating the word "assai," and by their gestures I understood that they invited me to go on land, an invitation that I declined. So that, on that day, the boat did not push off, to the great displeasure of Master Land, who could not complete his provisions. This adroit Canadian employed his time in preparing the viands and meat he had brought off the island. As for the savages, they returned to the shore about 11 o'clock in the morning, as soon as the coral tops began to disappear under the rising tide. But I saw their numbers had increased considerably on the shore. Probably they came from neighboring islands, or very likely from Papua. However, I had not seen a single native canoe. Having nothing better to do, I thought of dragging these beautiful limpid waters, under which I saw a profusion of shells, zoophytes, and marine plants. Moreover, it was the last day that the Nautilus would pass in these parts. If it float in open seas the next day, according to Captain Nemo's promise, I therefore called Conseil, who brought me a little light drag, very like those for the oyster fishery. Now to work. For 2 hours we fished unceasingly, but without bringing up any rarities. The drag was filled with Midas ears, harps, melames, and particularly the most beautiful hammers I have ever seen. We also brought up some sea slugs, pearl oysters, and a dozen little turtles that were reserved for the pantry on board. But just when I was expecting it least, I put my hand on a wonder, I might say a natural deformity, very rarely met with. Conseil was just dragging, and his net came up filled with divers ordinary shells, when all at once he saw me plunge my arm quickly into the net to draw out a shell, and heard me utter a cry. "What is the matter, sir?" he asked in surprise. "Has master been bitten?" "No, my boy, but I would willingly have given a finger for my discovery." "What discovery?" "This shell," I said, holding up the object of my triumph. "It is simply an olive porphyry, genus olive, order of the Pectinidae branchiide, classified gastropod, subclass mollusca." "Yes, Consul, but instead of being rolled from right to left, this olive turns from left to right." "Is it possible?" "Yes, my boy. It's a left shell." Shells are all right-handed, with rare exceptions, and when by chance their spiral is left, amateurs are ready to pay their weight in gold. Consul and I was absorbed in the contemplation of our treasure, and I was promising myself to enrich the museum with it, when a stone, unfortunately thrown by a native, struck against and broke the precious object in Consul's hand. I uttered a cry of despair. Consul took up his gun and aimed at a savage who was poising his sling at 10 yards from him. I would have stopped him, but his blow took effect and broke the bracelet of the amulets which enriched the arm of the savage. "Well, sir, do you not see that the cannibal has commenced the attack?" "A shell is not worth the life of a man," said I. "Ah, the scoundrel!" cried Consul. "I would rather he had broken my shoulder." Consul was in earnest, but I was not of his opinion. However, the situation had changed some minutes before, and we had not perceived. A score of canoes surrounded the Nautilus. These canoes, scooped out of the trunk of a tree, long, narrow, well adapted for speed, were balanced by means of a long bamboo pole, which floated on the water. They were managed by skillful, half-naked paddlers, and I watched their advance with some uneasiness. It was evident that these Papuans had already had dealings with the Europeans and knew their ships. But this long iron cylinder anchored in the bay without masts or chimneys, what could they think of it? Nothing good, for at first they kept at a respectful distance. However, seeing it motionless by degrees, they took courage and sought to familiarize themselves with it. Now this familiarity was precisely what it was necessary to avoid. Our arms, which were noiseless, could only produce a moderate effect on the savages, who have little respect for aught but blustering things. The thunderbolt, without the reverberations of thunder, would frighten man but little, though the danger lies in the lightning, not in the noise. At this moment the canoes approached the Nautilus, and a shower of arrows alighted on her. I went down to the salon, but found no one there. I ventured to the knock on the door that opened into the captain's room. "Come in," was the answer. I entered and found Captain Nemo deep in algebraic calculations of x and other quantities. "Am I disturbing you?" said I, for courteous's sake. "That is true, Monsieur Anorax," replied the captain, "but I think you have serious reasons for wishing me to see me. Very grave ones. The natives are surrounding us in their canoes, and in a few minutes we shall certainly be attacked by many hundred savages." "Ah," said Captain Nemo quietly. "Are they come with their canoes?" "Yes, sir." "Well, sir, we must close the hatches." "Exactly, and I came to say to you—" "Nothing can be more simple," said the Captain Nemo, and pressing an electric button, he transmitted an order to the ship's crew. "It is all done, sir," said he, after some moments. "The pinnace is ready, and the hatches are closed. You do not fear, I imagine, that these gentlemen could stave in walls on which the balls of your frigate have had no effect?" "No, Captain, but a danger still exists." "What is that, sir?" "It is that tomorrow, at about this hour, we must open the hatches to renew the air of the Nautilus. Now, if at this moment the Papuans should occupy the platform, I do not see how you could prevent them from entering." "Then, sir, you suppose that they will board us?" certain of it." "Well, sir, let them come. I see no reason to hinder them. After all, these Papuans are poor creatures, and I am unwilling that my visit to the island should cost the life of a single one of these wretches." Upon that I was going away, but Captain Nemo detained me and asked me to sit down by him. He questioned me with interest about our excursions on shore and our hunting, and seemed not to understand the cravings for meat that possessed the Canadian. Then the conversation turned on more various subjects, and without being more communicative, Captain Nemo showed himself more amiable. Among other things, we happened to speak of the situation of the Nautilus, run aground in exactly the same spot in the same strait where Dumont d'Urberville was nearly lost. Apropos of this d'Urberville was one of your great sailors, said the captain to me, one of your most intelligent navigators. He's the captain cook of your Frenchman. Unfortunate man of science. After having braved the icebergs of the South Pole, the coral reefs of Oceania, the cannibals of the Pacific, to perish miserably in a railway train. If this energetic man could have reflected during the last moments of his life, what must have been uppermost in his last thoughts, do you suppose? So speaking, Captain Nemo seemed moved, and his emotion gave me a better opinion of him. Then, chart in hand, we reviewed the travels of the French navigator, his voyages of circumnavigation, his double detention at the South Pole, which led to the discovery of Adeline and Louis-Philippe, and fixing the hydrographical bearings of the principal islands of Oceania. That which your d'Urberville has done on the surface of the seas, said Captain Nemo, that I have done under them, and more easily, more completely than he. The Astrolabe and the Zelee, incessantly tossed about by hurricanes, could not be worth the Nautilus, quiet repository of labor that she is, truly motionless in the midst of waters. Tomorrow, added the captain, rising, tomorrow at 3 p.m., the Nautilus shall float and leave the Strait of Torres uninjured. Having curtly pronounced these words, Captain Nemo bowed slightly. This was to dismiss me, and I went back to my room. There I found Conseil, who wished to know the results of my interview with the captain. "My boy," said I, "when I feigned to believe that his Nautilus was threatened by the natives of Papua, the captain answered me very sarcastically. I have but one thing to say to you. Have confidence in him and go to sleep in peace. Have you no need of my services, sir?" "No, my friend. What is Ned Land doing?" "If you will excuse me, sir," answered Conseil. "Friend Ned is busy making a kangaroo pie which will be a marvel." I remained alone and went to bed, but slept indifferently. I heard the noise of the savages who stamped on the platform, utterly deafening cries. The night passed thus without disturbing the ordinary repose of the crew. The presence of these cannibals affected them no more than the soldiers of the masked battery care for the ants that crawled over its front. At 6 a.m, I rose. The hatches had not been opened. The inner air was not renewed, but the reservoirs, filled readily for any emergency, were now restored to and discharged several cubic feet of oxygen into the exhausted atmosphere of the Nautilus. I worked in my room until noon, without having seen Captain Nemo even for an instant. On board, no preparations for departure were visible. I waited still some time and then went into the large saloon. The clock marked 2:30. In 10 minutes, it would be high tide, and if Captain Nemo had not made a rash promise, the Nautilus would be immediately detached. If not, many months would pass ere she could leave her bed of coral. However, some warning vibrations began to be felt in the vessel. I heard the keel grating against the rough, cankerous bottom of the coral reef. At 3:25, Captain Nemo appeared in the salon. "We are going to start," he said. "Ah," replied I, "I've given the order to open the hatches." "And the Papuans?" "The Papuans," answered Captain Nemo, slightly shrugging his shoulders. "Will they not come inside the Nautilus?" "How? Only by leaping over the hatches you have opened?" "Monsieur Anorax," quietly answered Captain Nemo, "they will not enter the hatches of the Nautilus in that way, even if they were open." I looked at the captain. "You do not understand?" said he. "Hardly. Well, come, you will see." I directed my steps towards the central staircase. There Ned Land and Conseil were slyly watching some of the ship's crew, who were opening hatches while cries of rage and fearsome voraciousness sounded outside. The port lids were pulled down outside. 20 horrible faces appeared, but the first native who placed his hand on the stair rail, struck from behind by some invisible force, I know not what, fled uttering the most fearful cries and making the wildest contortions. 10 of his companions followed him. They met with the same face. Conseil was in ecstasy. Ned Land, carried away by his violent instincts, rushed onto the staircase, but the moment he seized the rail with both hands, he, in turn, was overthrown. "I'm struck by a thunderbolt," cried he with an oath. This explained all. It was no rail, but a metallic cable charged with electricity from the deck communicating with the platform. Whoever touched it felt a powerful shock, and this shock would have been mortal if Captain Nemo had discharged into the conductor the whole force of the current. It might truly be said that between his assailants and himself, he had stretched a network of electricity which none could pass with impunity. Meanwhile, the exasperated Papuans had beaten a retreat, paralyzed with terror. As for us, half laughing, we consoled and rubbed the unfortunate Ned Land, who swore like one possessed. But at this moment, the Nautilus, raised by the last waves of the tide, quit her coral bed exactly at the 40th minute fixed by the captain. Her screws swept the water. Slowly and majestically, her speed increased gradually. Sailing on the surface of the ocean, she quitted safe and sound the dangerous passes of the Straits of Torres. So quoth this raven. What? You're still here after the whole story? I really appreciate that, darlings. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. And I always love to hear from you. Have a glorious day, my darlings.